I'm Scott Allen Miller, and this is my life living in Latin America. I'm still here in New York. It is still incredibly cold. That is so much snow blowing around. It's just starting to come down. It is so cold out here. And today I'm going to be on my last full day here in New York at my dad's place. I'm going to be talking about the things that we found surprising in our trip back to the U.S. This is our first time spending a bit of time with family. We were back last year, but mostly we were on vacation. We went to Florida, went to Disney World, so it's a little bit different. But we're actually spending time around the U.S. On this particular trip, and we have some surprises that, as people who've lived outside the country for a while, that I just took some notes as we came back that I think are worth noting. And of course, some people do this all the time. There's always videos talking about the surprises that people have coming back. I'm going to try to touch on ones that we find a little bit different than most people talk about. So we're going to get that to that today, right after that bump. All right, my first surprise, and this is a big one. This is really caught me quite a bit, and my wife found the same thing, is that coming back and eating for 2 weeks at regular restaurants, doing normal things, not being on a vacation, not doing, Disney type stuff, being just in the U.S., eating normal U.S. food, both Texas and New York. One thing that we found very strongly is that we were both completely affected by Montezuma's revenge, that whole traveler's sickness thing that happens from just eating food you're not familiar with. Americans think of it as going to Mexico and Mexican food making them sick, which of course it often does, but coming the reverse and coming back to the United States after living so long abroad and not having U.S. food for a really long time, we're finding the exact same thing in reverse. We've been kind of not feeling so great for weeks. It's been almost 2 weeks, maybe even over 2 weeks at this point, and I'm still impacted every day. It totally affects me. I feel like I'm in the bathroom every 2 to 3 hours, which not what you guys wanted to know, but it's not terrible most of the time, but sometimes it really is. And at this point, we're heading to the airport in a little while. So tonight's dinner is the last meal I plan on having while here. I'm going to go an entire day without food just so I can safely do the flight home, because it's affecting me so much. And I'm not typically too prone to stomach issues, so it's a little bit surprising how much I've really noticed it here. And we're eating all kinds of things. We've gone out to restaurants, we're eating at home, we're doing our own food prep. We're not like trying to do anything extravagant, although there is a lot of food that we missed. And I did just get to eat ant cookies, which is my number one thing when I get back home. That and Pizza Paul's Pizza in Geneseo, New York. They're the foods that I missed the most, and really I was surprised by how much our taste changed. I guess this is item number 2, is how much our taste have changed since we've been away. That coming back, so many of the foods that we look forward to or think that we miss, even things that you think would be really consistent, Taco Bell, Burger King, come back and have them here, and it's not the same. It's not that they're bad, but it doesn't have the same nostalgia. Like, it doesn't hit a spot that I'm like, oh, this is what I missed. I've been needing this. No, it's like, oh, this isn't as good as I remember, and I'm not sure if my tastes have changed, or maybe they've changed their recipes and I don't realize it. Sorry for the shaking. I'm really shaking from the cold. It is like -9, I think, Celsius here today, which for Americans, it's kind of like, yeah, it's cold, but for Nicaraguans, we're in pain. But pretty much everywhere we've gone, the food has been just not as good as we expect it to be, even when we can tell that it's well made. It's just, I think our tastes have changed at this point, having been so long. And of course, it's not some special variety. It's not like someone coming from Nicaragua for the first time and being like, oh, I've never had this before, and being all excited about it. It's like, oh yeah, I missed this, I have this memory, and then having it and going, it doesn't really fulfill that need that we thought we had. The two things that are unique to that, though, that are different, Pizza Paul's still hits that. This is the pizza of my childhood. It's not the one that we used to get, because I didn't live in Geneseo. I lived across the valley. So I'm used to Pepperoni's, or previously Davis's Pizza from Pavilion, New York. And they're very similar, and Pizza Paul's brings me back to that flavor, and it has not changed. It's completely the same thing, and getting the local blue cheese dressing and getting their brownies, and it's all, the tastes are just like it was. So that hasn't changed. And Ant Cookies, which does old-fashioned subs on Main Street in Geneseo, right next to Pizza Paul's, absolutely amazing. Their subs are exactly the same. So those two things, I miss them, and they fill that spot perfectly. So those parts of my taste have not changed, but most things seem to have, or just all the other food has changed, and it's just those two that haven't. I don't know, but those two are my favorites by far, and pizza and subs, they're the things I miss. Everything else, I'm pretty happy with the food in Nicaragua, especially in Managua where we have some variety. All right, my second thing on the list is apps for restaurants. This is something we totally have gotten away from in Nicaragua. We never have an app specific to a restaurant. Like, it doesn't come up. Like, no one would ever think of it. So it's so outside the norm. People don't install apps for things like that. Coming back to the US, the first time we wanted to eat at a restaurant, it was like, well, you're allowed to go without an app, but all the prices are like triple, like really high if you go without an app. But if you have the app, then it's much cheaper. But of course, the apps don't work. Half the things aren't on the menu. The stuff you want isn't there. You can't customize the way that you want. You order on the app, and then you show up at the restaurant, and they don't actually have the order, claim that the app doesn't work. Of course, the app did work. They just use it as an excuse because it's so believable and there's no way to prove that it works. But this whole, like, I have to install an app for every restaurant I want to use, it really discourages me now as a visitor. I'm like, I'm not even going to bother eating there. I'm not going to install an app to go eat at a restaurant. Not going to happen. But if I lived here full time, I'd be like, yeah, I got 20 apps for the 20 restaurants I like. And I get that they want to make it sticky. They've made eating at places so inconvenient and displeasurable. Like, it's really surprising how awful it is. And 3 different delivery things. I got to have Uber Eats, I got to have Grubhub, I've got to have DoorDash. None of them work here in Geneseo, which is a college town, right? Major university here, State University of New York, and loads of people who would get delivery. There's no working delivery in town. We tried. Uber Eats doesn't work. Grubhub doesn't work. They're all down. The whole time we've been here, all 3 of them completely down, no drivers. We would place orders and the orders wouldn't come up. We tried some of those restaurant things, right? Taco Bell. Go into Taco Bell. Can I order Taco Bell? There's a Taco Bell around the corner. I can see it almost from the balcony. Nope. The app says there's no Taco Bell in town. Taco Bell's own app doesn't know where the Taco Bell is. Burger King's app doesn't do delivery. The only places that do delivery are the local places, and they don't do it through the services. They only do it through their own delivery mechanisms, through their own websites. So even when you have apps for all the major restaurants, you have to go to websites for something else. And even when you have delivery services, you have to go to third party or the initial place. I'm so used to Nicaragua. We got one app, Pedidos Ya. It works for basically every restaurant that has delivery. There are a few that you do direct. That does exist, but there's no apps for restaurants. Rarely do you go to a website or WhatsApp someone to get a delivery. Everything's through a single app. There used to be 2, now there's 1. It's so simple and straightforward. The difficulty in doing basic food ordering in the US and the limited access to stuff is so extreme that really caught me off guard. But the having to install an individual app for every restaurant, the effort of doing the simplest things, it's so high. All right, I got to do a follow-up because I did the video talking about the apps and all the problems from that, and I have the best stories from this evening right after I made that video. So we're going to talk about that real quickly. So for dinner tonight, we had a gift card to go to Burger King, and we're like, okay, it's our last night that we have a dinner option, so we're going to go to Burger King and get food. So my wife tries to order using the gift card through the app, and then we're just going to go pick it up because there's no delivery here, which is one of the surprising things in the U.S. is how little delivery options there are. We're so used to just anything can be delivered. Now, lots of problems in Nicaragua, constantly having delivery problems. So that's not great, but at least they try. Here, there's just nothing offers delivery, it seems. So at least in all the places we've been. So we order in the app. Well, the app fails. For whatever reason, it doesn't allow, it just says, can't place your order. So she's like, okay, you got to go to Burger King. I'm like, whatever. I don't even like using the apps. So as I already made a video today about how I don't like apps, perfect. So we went to the Burger King and I went in and I did the order on the thing and I put the gift card in and it said declined. I'm like, okay, great. So I go up to the counter and I go to pay there. Declined. Then I text Dominica, I'm like, my wife, and I'm like, it's saying decline. She's like, well, I tried to put it in the app. Maybe it's in the app. I'm like, oh, okay. So I show them the app and the app shows that we have money in the app. And they're like, oh no, you use the app? Never use the app. We would never touch the app as employees. It never works. Everything's bad. And we're like, oh, great. So the money's in the app. Turns out the app is completely broken. Doesn't work in any way whatsoever. Not only can it not place orders, they tried over and over for 15, 20 minutes. They got the general manager. They got the team lead. Everyone's there. No one can make the app place an order at all. Completely not going to happen. They also couldn't transfer the money out of the app onto a card, which is something it's supposed to do. You're supposed to be able to put the money in and take it out. Nope, that doesn't work either. They couldn't put through any order. They couldn't give us a discount of the $20. That's the amount that was on the card. They couldn't do anything. And we just sit there with so much time that they're going through everything and they're all like, the app is such a problem. The app is such a problem. Why do they use the app? I also found out that Burger King charges 10% more for using the app. There's just a cost penalty for using the app. If you go into the store, the order was $40. You do the app, same order, because we copied it. They checked that it was the same, $44. So Burger King really incentivizes you, even if the app works, not to use the app. It's inconvenient and they charge you extra. So all negative, no matter what. Whole thing was crazy. Eventually they gave up. And I just want to say, completely across the board, every person I dealt with at Burger King today was fantastic. They all tried to be helpful. They all made sure they did everything right. They made sure the food was right. And in the end, when nothing worked, they comped the whole meal and we got a free dinner. Now, I mean, obviously we put in the gift card and we paid for half of it with that. So we legitimately paid half, but the restaurant covered the other half because they don't have the capability to give us just half off. They had to give us the whole thing or they were going to have to overcharge us and steal. So their only options were stealing $20 from us or giving us the whole meal. Obviously, they opted to give us the whole meal as their only actual recourse, but their systems were so bad and the app created so many problems. So that was just a funny thing. But while I was there, I had mentioned in the video earlier about how the local Taco Bell's app disavows the local restaurant. Well, I asked about that. I'm like, hey, their app doesn't work either. They're like, oh yeah, everyone in town knows. I'm like, oh, they're like, don't you know why? I'm like, no. And they're like, well, it turns out that the Taco Bell store in town is so bad that Taco Bell corporate is disavowing it because they will just close randomly but keep taking orders. So they take all the money and just don't give people their food. So no delivery driver and no delivery service will do business with them. And so they just have to take it off the app. So Taco Bell completely removed them instead of closing the store, which is weird, but okay. So the store stays open, but they do such a terrible job that no service will work with them, including Taco Bell corporate. So it's a real thing. The apps are a pretty significant problem here. They're not just an annoying artifact of American culture. They're actually a thing that's causing real problems for the businesses and people in the country. Anyway, it was such a prescient thing that happened today. I had to add that to the video. My next one, and I talk about this a lot, is bathrooms. Of course, we know that you flush toilet paper in the US, and most of you who watch my show know you don't flush it in Nicaragua, at least not most of the time. But there's more to it. One of the big surprises is that, toilet paper in the US is just way bigger deal. You have to. You flush it. Americans are just way more into using toilet paper. You say, what? Who doesn't use toilet paper? Well, everyone uses toilet paper, but in other parts of the world, I don't know how many, but in Nicaragua for sure, wipes have become a really big thing because we don't flush, because we throw everything away. Using wipes doesn't cause the problems that it does in other places like the US. So because of that, wipes are way more popular and just everybody uses them pretty much all the time. So the amount that you rely on toilet paper is far less. So the amount that you're throwing away is far less. And you say, well, why does that matter? What does that really bring up? Well, one thing is Americans are much more focused on having quality toilet paper. Toilet paper quality on average in Nicaragua, kind of poor, but it doesn't really matter so much because you have wipes all the time. Here in the US, people depend on the toilet paper, so they expect it to be much better. Also, though, because the toilet paper, whoa, that's a lot of wind. We're going to wait a second. Now, because you have so much thicker, much more comfortable toilet paper, you also need to use more because you don't have those wipes, and it's all going to go down to the toilet because that's what you do. You don't throw it in the trash. Suddenly, we got clogs again. I've started to forget after years of living abroad and never having to deal with clogged toilets. Never is a strong word, but very rarely, once or twice per year at most, if even that. Once a year would be surprising. But here it's been, 3 or 4 times in 2 weeks. It's a normal thing. And I don't mean for myself. I get called for everyone because that's just how it works. I'm always the one who has to deal with it. So I notice a lot more because someone's like, hey, it's not working. Can you go look at this toilet? And normally when I'm in Nicaragua, it just means flushing again. Well, just wait a second, flush again, and it's fine. Here it's actually getting a plunger and plunging it out. It's a completely different experience. And I forget that this was a thing before we left, that was a normal thing. And living overseas, many places are like that. It's not a US thing. But being in Nicaragua, where wipes and once in a while bidets are pretty popular, it's a different experience and one that caught us off guard, that it's so much more paper and material going into the plumbing that you just run into a lot more challenges with it. It is so cold. I have to record these in 2-minute segments or I can't handle it. Next up is airplanes. And I don't mean flying around. I mean just being places in the US. Suddenly you hear airplanes all the time. I've gotten so used to living without the sound of airplanes. When we hear one, it's a big deal. It's like, what's going on? And it's normally a little single prop, like crop duster. Here, there's just traffic going overhead all the time. It really catches you off guard, and something you don't think about, that we just don't have that noise. We have other noise, trust me, but not that one, and so you notice it. So even when I was doing some recording, I'd be like, oh, I gotta stop. There's so much sound of the airplane going over. Of course, the cold just keeps catching us off guard. The biggest thing that I noticed when I was really paying attention, going down the road, just looking at things as I went, is I started to realize that I noticed poverty in a whole new way. And I'm not saying it wasn't there before and that it's happened recently. I mean that I talk about this a bit when people move to Nicaragua. I'm like, you really have to pay some attention and think about what you're seeing and kind of give it some time. Because when you first arrive, you kind of feel like everything's really poor. And trust me, it's a poor country. But you get there and you feel like you're seeing an unsufferable a level of poverty that you're like, wow, this is so rough. I don't know if I can handle this. And after a bit of time, you come to realize that what you're seeing isn't necessarily representative of poverty in the way that you think it is. And many of the places you're seeing are, well, that's someone's shack, that's not their home, or it's like a little shed for selling something. It's not a house. Or you realize that things look one way and are very different inside. And coming back to the United States, I realize that my view of things has flipped, and I start to realize that I'm seeing things that look kind of decent on the outside, and I realize are actually quite poor, and that the poverty is, when you've kind of stepped away and come back, a lot more visible. And I didn't feel like you had that much visible poverty in the US, but now, especially in Texas, it really was noticeable. You could see kind of the struggle in businesses and shops and people in day-to-day life. And of course, there's lots of not poverty as well. But the amount of visible poverty that really struck me was quite a lot. And I realized that I'm now seeing the same effect that people get when they come to Nicaragua, is that in both cases, when you're going to a new place, the visible poverty, you get used to the place that you're in. And when you go to the other, it stands out. So growing up in the US, I wasn't really used to noticing the poverty, but now being away and coming back, it's noticeable in a way that I just didn't have before. So that was really interesting. Also really big, back to the bathroom. Americans use, on average, really small showers. We're used to Nicaragua, where showers on average are really big, like easily twice the standing room on average as an American shower. So in the US, everywhere that I've been these few weeks, when you're taking a shower, you feel like you're kind of up against a wall, you're kind of bouncing into the shower curtain. It's not a big deal, and it's what I'm used to. And the tubs are often plastic or pre-made, so the amount of foot room isn't that big, but in Nicaragua, almost everything is custom-made tile. So your feet have as much room as your shoulders. Your shoulders have twice as much room as they do here. It's just so much larger. And of course, at my house in Nicaragua, it's like 3 or 4 times, quite literally, the space of the showers that I'm experiencing here. That's really noticeable, and a thing you just would not expect at all. Cell phones. I've noticed that cell phone coverage isn't as good. Now, I knew in Nicaragua, we used to be like, oh, our cell phone coverage is so good, but having been there for a while, we know that there's areas that don't have great coverage. Between like where I live in Leon and the beach, there's big drop-off points, but there's no houses out there. It's the middle of nowhere. But here we were in the middle of like the Houston metro, in areas with much bigger population than like all of Leon. And we'd have huge swaths of area with no coverage whatsoever, right in the middle of businesses and houses and densely populated areas in one of the biggest metros in North America. So we got used to having quite a bit more coverage in less populated areas in Nicaragua than in the US. That caught me off guard. I figured coming back after 4 years and really using cell phone coverage that it would have improved a lot and at least be up to par with when we got to Nicaragua, but it is not. It is really noticeable that it has dropped off in coverage, or comparatively to Nicaragua is a drop-off in coverage. And it feels, this is very difficult to say, I feel like when using Tigo in Nicaragua that it was slower than what I'm experiencing with T-Mobile in the US, but I feel that the T-Mobile in the US is slower than what I'm experiencing with Claro in Nicaragua. Those are very subjective, and you can't use speed tests because they always, all of them return a great result, and it's not true. It's the usable speed, and that you just kind of have to go by a feel without a lot of effort to measure it. It feels like using Claro in Nicaragua, everything is instant and huge bandwidth. I'm able to watch movies, just click a button, watch a movie, no problem. It's the exact same movie service, come to the US, it works, but it's stuttering and struggling, and it's like, oh, well, it works, but it's not the same. I have no problem. Like in Nicaragua, you would never know you weren't on high-speed Wi-Fi in your house when you're using Claro, other than you're using up your data. So that was a bit surprising, just how much that was seemingly slower in the US. I was expecting after this time for it to be really, really fast because I'm on what they call 5G here, and I'm not Nicaragua, but it's clearly not using the bandwidth that would imply. We also had the problem, which I did other videos about, that the computer system for the state of Texas, the entire police system, the Department of Public Services, for the protective services for the entire state went down on the day that we were scheduled to do our driver's license test, which is pretty staggering. We have not had a, full day outage nationwide of anything technology related in Nicaragua in all the years that we've been there. But this is the second or third time for the state of Texas in a year. And that was a week ago. We have not gotten notice that their system is back up yet. It's still down. And the last time it went down in January, it was down for weeks at that point, and all completely, obvious stuff that could easily have been prevented with any competence whatsoever. And that's something we've gotten used to, is that systems tend to work, even if they're a little bit more antiquated and less fancy. And if things do go down, people just go to pen and paper and they work through it. They make things work. They go to manual and get things done. In Texas, everything just shut down and has been shut down. There's no end in sight to this complete outage. So anyone who needs a driver's license like me, or anyone who needs to process anything through the state, they're just waiting for someone to get their computers back up and running again. That's amazing that the systems are so fragile and the ability to work around it does not exist at all. We forgot or get used to just so much more competence in day-to-day life, and especially in government systems and government workers, that people really are there. It might be a little bit slow, but things get done. People take their jobs seriously and know that they need to provide services to the public, and that's just really noticeably lacking in the U.S. I kind of like recording on this phone, and I'm glad that it's easy to run out and do this in these little bursts because it's so cold. All right, salmonella. Let's talk about that. So being in the U.S., immediately people are afraid of salmonella. It's like the big thing. People are really worried about it. You got food prep and you can't eat raw cookie dough and all kinds of things because you might get salmonella. And it occurred to me that no one's talked about salmonella in years where I am. So I asked Valentina what her opinion was. She's like, yeah, that is like a joke everywhere. That's an American thing. People are not worried about salmonella in the rest of the world because it's just an unpleasantness from eating poorly prepared food. And sometimes it's just going to happen. It's just really basic with no long-term effects. Food poisoning. Yeah, it's inconvenient. No one wants it, but it's not a thing to worry about because it's just not feeling good for a day or two. It's not a big deal, but Americans act like it's life-threatening or maybe it's going to destroy your liver, but that's like listeria, not salmonella. People are really worried about things that are not worth worrying about. Like, why is that a fear? But that fear of all kinds of things permeates society and you feel it all over the place. But salmonella is such a specific example of something that really the whole world doesn't worry about, and Americans are really convinced is a really bad thing. I don't think anyone knows what it is. They don't realize that they're being scared into doing all these extra food prep things and avoiding certain products over something they don't realize how minor it actually is, and that probably they've had it not in the too distant past and didn't even realize it because it's not that big of a deal most of the time. It's very rare that it's a big thing. So that was really noticeable. Another big one, when we were leaving Nicaragua, we were talking about, we just had to grab some medicine to make sure we had it with us in case we needed it. And my daughter said, well, we could just run to the store in the U.S. and no, we can't. I'm like, no, this is an antibiotic, and my daughter has a toe infection, so we need an antibiotic potentially, and she is on it. We're like, we can't just go to a pharmacy and just get that. She's like, wait, what? She's like, I understand that, like, narcotics you can't just go get, but you can't go get basic drugs like antibiotics and, hormone pills or just any normal, non-addictive, drug. I'm like, no, you got to have prescriptions for that stuff. And that means you have to pay a fortune to see a doctor. The last time we wanted to see a doctor, even just to have a conversation, was $500 to walk in the door. So easily $1,000, even with insurance, to have a conversation with a doctor to get a prescription for something we already need, just to allow the pharmacy to sell it to us at much higher prices than we're used to. What's, $1 or $2 for the antibiotic, maybe $3 in Nicaragua is easily 10 to 20 in the United States. Not a big deal until you do the percentage math that adds up, but the $1,000 to get a doctor to write something to allow us to have something we already know we need, that's a big deal. She's like, that's crazy. How do they function like that? I'm like, seriously, that's when you come from other places, people don't realize how hard this is to deal with on a day-to-day basis. It's very much a real thing. Now, another one that I noticed is just how much, and people talk about this a lot, but how much, getting in a car to go anywhere. We're used to, yes, getting in a car most times. I can walk to a lot of things, but it's a long walk. We drive places, and partially here up in New York, because of the cold, we have to drive even across the parking lot because you can't. It's so cold. But in Texas, it was to go to the local anything meant getting on a highway, a real highway, a bigger road than we ever deal with in Nicaragua, to go between local locations without getting onto the big interstate. These are just the roads to go to the local restaurant. Big highways. That stuff, you forget how much giant parking lots and huge open spaces around businesses for parking all the cars and having to take a car to every single location and it taking quite a while to get pretty short distances. And on these massive roads with huge distances for your local stores. That's really surprising. I started paying attention to just how far it was to get to the things that we kind of thought of as being around the corner and how far you had to drive just to get out of your development. Oh, really, really long distances. Those are things that we've really forgotten how much there is of that, how much time is spent in that, getting away from your development, getting on the highway kind of stuff. We're just used to things being on the main road, pull right over in front of it. Everything's pretty close, and you could walk if you had, 20, 30 minutes. All right, this one is a big one. In Nicaragua, we're used to, if you have an airport shuttle, it's going to get you to the airport for your flight. Period. Doesn't matter what time your flight is, if it's delayed, if it's early, if it's the middle of the night, middle of the day, evening, it doesn't matter. They're going to get you to the airport. Having an airport shuttle means you can make it to your flight. It means the thing that you would want if you're looking up airport shuttle. In the United States, every single hotel we've dealt with has had an airport shuttle. We've stayed at hotels just to use the airport shuttle. We've chosen ones based on it. We've called to check on it. We wanted to go to ones based on it. Every single one for the entire time we've been here, the airport shuttle that they advertise cannot get us to the airport for our flight or hundreds of flights before it. No matter how late we would want to go, the shuttle doesn't run until those flights would have already left, let alone the 3 hours you have to get there before the flight. So they're not starting their shuttle service until 3 or 4 or 5 hours after lots of flights are going. And if you're doing any amount of flying, you generally start on the early side in the day. Yeah, a lot of people fly in the evenings. I get it. But flights start early in the morning, and some places go 24 hours a day. Their shuttle's only for convenient one shift of the day. 8 hours of the day, they have an airport shuttle for. So a tiny percentage of the people who go to that hotel for the purpose of a shuttle or being near the airport can use the shuttle that they're advertising. Why are they advertising an airport shuttle if you can't use the shuttle to get to and from the airport at that hotel? That's crazy. But now we've come to expect it. The last one we just called. We're like, well, we need to be right by the airport. So we got the closest one to the airport that we could get. It says airport shuttle. So I call and I'm like, okay, we have to be there at 3 a.m. because Spirit sent out a thing. The airport security takes so long. You got to be there 3 hours. People are missing their flights because the American security is so slow that you're racing to get onto a plane, which we've experienced several different places. And so we're like, okay, so we call and I'm like, we got to be there at 3, which means we got to leave at 2:45. And they're like, yeah, we start picking up at 7, which means they don't really leave until 7:05, 7:10 at best. And you're taking a risk. What if they're not there? Our flight would have left hours before they even picked us up, 4 or 5 hours before we needed to get through security. Like, so impossible to use. Why do they even bother having a shuttle? This makes no sense at all, but this is apparently people are just okay with this. And the last one, I found this one really weird. I noticed this in old movies, and then I've noticed it in more recent ones as well, because we've been watching movies while we're here from time to time. And one of the things that constantly comes up in American media is the trope, and it's a trope in media, so take it for what it's worth. But Americans really accept a general kind of plot device that the American government or state governments or local governments or something are constantly on the search on how to take your children away. I've never been anywhere else in the world where people have this like regular everyday fear of, I may just have a neighbor that doesn't like me and people will come and take my children away. Like, that's a real fear. Now, does that really happen very often? I don't think so, but it's become enough of a fear, kind of like the salmonella, kind of like that children being abducted in the 80s and people selling you drugs everywhere, all completely made up things to just inspire fear and try to get people to be manipulated. It was an easy way to manipulate the public. And this is probably the same kind of thing. But that fear that your children are just going to be taken away or that you can't let them out to play because they'll be abducted. Or worse, you let them out to play and someone will call Child Protective Services and have your children taken away because you're not an insane, crazy person. Because that's a real fear, supposedly. That's what people live with. And no wonder that there's such a feeling of fear about everything all the time. But that's really a noticeable one. That trope I've never encountered anywhere else in the world. Anyway, those are some of the things that I found surprising being back in the US for a couple weeks after 4 years in Nicaragua and 10 years of living abroad. Thanks for joining me. Like and subscribe. If you'd like to help support the channel, you can buy me a coffee at the link above, buymeacoffee.com/Scott Allen Miller. We have a channel membership as well. Does basically the same thing in a slightly different way through YouTube. If you would be so kind as to go down in the comments, say hello if nothing else, but ask questions, leave your own comments. And of course, we have instructions down in the show notes about how to contact me if you want to, or how to send in a video question so you can be on the show too. I love it when people do that. So please take the time to consider at least doing that. Hit that like button. Tell someone about the show. Stay tuned because we're going to be doing a lot of material about moving abroad, becoming an expat, and I'll be heading back to Nicaragua in just about 48 hours here. I cannot wait to get out of this cold. I cannot tell you how much I'm looking forward to the heat of Nicaragua after this. This really reminds me why we chose to live in the tropics. I do appreciate avoiding cold days like this at all costs, and I will see all of you tomorrow.